Hi class, welcome to our week 1 PowerPoint to help you prepare for our week 1 quiz. I'm not going to go through the PowerPoint frame by frame because we'll be doing that in class, and so really for this week this particular recording is going to be more useful for you, and so it deals with communication theory, the undergirding of our discipline. And mostly what I really want to do is walk you through how to read the 3 sets of readings that you have for this week. So first of all, the business communication reading. Let me actually back up a little bit in this reading to page 6, because that is where you'll find the definition of communication, and that's one of the first things I really want you to note. Communication can be defined as the process of understanding and sharing meaning. So I see 4 important concepts there: that it's a process, not a product, and that's important. It's ongoing. It doesn't have an end point where we get to stop and set it down on the table and say, ta-da, look at what we have. We do get to have stopping points where we say, let's celebrate this, or let's deconstruct this and see what went wrong, but it's still generally ongoing. There is also an important emphasis on this understanding and sharing, that it's not just a linear process. It's not just a one-way street. It's understanding. It's sent, but it's also supposed to be received, and there is supposed to be a mutuality about it. And then finally, that it deals with meaning, which to me speaks of symbols. And your quiz isn't going to necessarily go that in depth, but those will be the kinds of things that we'll be discussing. So that's the type of reading that I want you to do. This particular reading you can do kind of quickly, because it is really, for some of you, just a review. You'll recognize the SMCR model by Shannon and Weaver, sender, message, channel, receiver model from 1949, where they modeled how communication occurred over the radio, and then the communication discipline took that and said, hey, that's kind of what happens face to face, and anywhere there's a source or a sender, there's a channel or a medium through which communication occurs, and then there is a message and there's a receiver. That happens in any form of media you can think of, even face to face, even just through the air. And so that's something important to look at, as those 4 elements: the source, but also, the source, the message, the channel, and the receiver, but also that there's always feedback, that sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional, but we might have verbal, we might have nonverbal signals that let the other person know what we think of their message, and that help keep that interaction going, or that transaction going. And then of course that it always exists within a context or within an environment that impacts it. The next thing that this talks about is that there's always noise or interference in the communication interaction. There is no such thing as 100% perfect communication, and we'll talk about some of the sources of that noise, but your reading talks about that too. So we used to think that communication was one way, back in the earlier part of the 20th century. That's why there was so much fear about propaganda, because people thought you could just shoot a message into someone like a bullet into a human body, and it would just affect everyone the same. But we found out later that is absolutely not true. It is at least a transaction where we're both evaluating each other all the time, evaluating the message all the time. And some of us believe it's actually even more than that, that it is transformational. And so the communication model itself has grown over time. And There are various contexts: intrapersonal, communicating with yourself. Some people would say, well, that's not really communication, that's psychology. That being said, some of the things that we study in the communication discipline dealing with impression management definitely deal with how we formulate our messages in order to have particular impacts on others. So those are certainly intrapersonal communication, choosing what we're going to wear, as this page says, being punctual, that sort of thing. That's communicating with ourselves in order to communicate with others effectively. Interpersonal, I think most of us know a lot about that. Group settings, public settings, and mass settings. Those are relatively self-explanatory. Of all the texts, this is the simplest, but I definitely want you to read it so that you can get an overview of the discipline or a review of the discipline. And this talks about being organized, being clear in our communication, being concise and punctual. So you get the picture. This is a very, very clear, concise text. I'm probably not going to take you any further into this particular one because I do want to spend some time looking at the Littlejohn text. Oh, actually, I'm going to take you into the communication theory for just a moment first. And I'm going to back it up to the first chapter. To the introduction. Actually, yeah, here we go, to chapter 1. Because it defines communication. So that's very important, and that will come into play in our discussion. So that will definitely be important on your quiz. And so we have our definition of communication from the business aspect of things, and this one also has Laswell's definition of who says what to whom with what effect. And neither of those is right, neither of those is wrong. They're both theories of what communication is. And so even that, in and of itself, the very definition of communication is theoretical because it can't really be disproven. It just gives you a different lens through which to look at reality. And then what is a theory? Some form of explanation of a class of observed phenomenon. And then there's Karl Popper's definition of theory, whereas in the Littlejohn reading there's going to be a different definition of the word theory. I think I just had you reading chapter 1 for this time, which is good because we'll be evaluating a theory a different week, and I want to stay under 10 minutes, so I'm going to take you into the Littlejohn reading very quickly and just show you how I read that textbook. So we're going to back that one up. For some reason these are all starting far into the texts. Alright, so here we have Littlejohn's definition of theory, and we have several different components of what a theory is, and that is important. The elements of a theory, explanations in theories, those bolded headings, and they are really, really well laid forth. That's why I like the Littlejohn, and that's why I chose this chapter, because it is set forth so well. And you'll notice that I tend to write in the margins a lot. If I were you, if any of these readings, this one I would print out and I would write in the margins. Some people call it marginalia. That's what really a lot of graduate students do to help organize and help expedite so much reading. This part about laws, rules, and systems is something that will come into play very heavily and be very important. The traditional ideal of theory, the hypothetical deductive hypotheses and what is important about them, validity and reliability, those concepts basically, if I've written about it in here, or if it's in a heading, or if I've numbered it, then it's probably important. I think that my telling you how I read the text is probably as useful or more useful than me going on about a 30-minute lecture about this stuff, because it is some thick stuff and it will take you some time, and of course all the quizzes are open book, open note, and you will have till Tuesday an hour before class. You don't so much need to worry about this part about how to evaluate a theory for this week, because that is a later lecture, so I am going to cover that on a later quiz, because this Little John reading is not necessarily long, but for some of you, if you haven't had it before, it is thick-headed, sort of. So I'm going to save that for when we discuss it, along with that chapter 2 in the theory text. So I will talk to you later, and I hope that you enjoy your reading, and please let me know if you have any questions. Take care.